Morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for part 2 of foundational reading skills. If you missed part 1, don't worry. We'll briefly review that information, and that video is available on the Read Naturally website. So today we're going to talk about the foundational skills that every student needs to master in order to become a proficient reader. We all plan instruction by following standards. They tell us what students should be able to do by the end of each grade, but standards don't tell us specifically how we should teach those skills. As you know, this is a 2-part series, and here's the big picture of both sessions. There are 4 foundational reading skills that we're discussing: print concepts, phonological awareness, phonics and word recognition, and fluency. Here's our agenda for today. Hopefully you've already downloaded the handout, which includes the webinar slides and some helpful takeaways. These are tools that you might find helpful as you plan and prioritize instruction using your current curriculum. Those takeaways are blank, reproducible tools that you can use right away with your students. And I'll tell you those page numbers as we go. Today, we're going to begin with a broad look at the standards and research behind the foundational reading skills of phonics and word recognition and fluency. I'll be referencing specific standards and research studies for these skills throughout the presentation. In the introduction to the Common Core State Standards, we're reminded that the focus of the standards is on results rather than on the means. Since the standards tell us what to teach, but not how, that leaves us free to use our professional judgment and experience to identify the tools and the knowledge that will be most helpful for meeting those goals. In this webinar, we're going to briefly review some key research findings about reading development and revisit some predictors of reading success. If we keep in mind which content is critical and which strategies are most effective, we can use this knowledge to plan and prioritize our instruction and get better results for our students. As I said, today our focus is on phonics and word recognition and fluency. The foundational reading skills for kindergarten through 5th grade include specific goals for print concepts, phonological awareness, phonics and word recognition, and fluency. These foundational skills are not an end in and of themselves, but they are necessary and important components of a comprehensive reading program. If we want to develop readers who can comprehend texts across a range of types and disciplines, they need to have a solid foundation in these basic skills. So today we're going to be looking at phonics and word recognition first. As students begin to transition from phonological awareness to phonics, they learn the relationship between a specific sound, the phoneme, and the letter or letters that represent that sound, the grapheme. Of course, we know that phonemic awareness and phonics are not the same, but instruction in phonemic awareness and phonics does tend to overlap. Let's take a look at the words on this slide. What do you notice about them? Word recognition involves 2 types of words: regular words, which students can decode by sounding them out, and irregular words that they cannot completely decode by sounding them out. And if you look closely at these words, I think you can see the difference between them. In the beginning stages of phonics instruction, an irregular word can also be a word that the student doesn't have the specific phonics skills to read. For example, before a student learns that together the letters K, N say N, the words new and no are irregular words. Once they've been taught that together those letters K, N say N, the words are no longer irregular. And that's assuming that the students have also been taught the vowel patterns EW and OW. So new and no are now decodable words. Let's look at what the research says about how we learn to read and spell regular and irregular words. Researchers had debated for decades about whether or not the brain uses a single route method for reading and spelling all types of words. These researchers used fMRI neuroimaging data to show that different parts of the brain were active based on whether a word had regular or irregular spelling patterns. As we talk about phonics and word recognition, we're going to label these two types of words. We'll call regular words that can be decoded sound out words, and irregular words that have to be learned by memory we'll call spell out words. This research has implications for how we teach these two types of words. Because our brains learn sound out words and spell out words differently, they should also be taught differently. The standards tell us about the big picture of phonics and word recognition for sound out or decodable words. They say to develop phonics and word recognition, kindergarten through 5th grade students must know and apply grade level phonics and word analysis skills in decoding words. So what percentage of words in English do you think are decodable? Actually, the spelling of words in English is more regular than you might think. About 50% of English words have regular spelling patterns. That means each sound in a word matches the letter or letters that represent the sound, like these examples: black, hot, and plain. Another 37% of words in English have only one error if you try to spell them by matching each sound to the letter or letters that represent the sound. Typically, that error comes up in spelling a vowel sound. A good example is this word, temperature. Even though most of the word is decodable, the vowel in the 3rd syllable in temperature must be learned. All vowels sometimes make that schwa sound, A student can almost read or spell the word temperature by sounding it out, but they need to learn by memory that the schwa sound in this word is made by the vowel A. Research clearly shows the value of systematic, explicit phonics instruction. And that makes sense when you recognize that 50% of English words are decodable and another 37% are very close. That means the remaining 13% of words in English must be learned by memory as irregular words. Another important emphasis of phonics and word recognition is learning high-frequency words. The standards tell us that kindergarten students must read common high-frequency words by sight, and students in 1st through 3rd grades need to recognize and read and spell grade-appropriate, irregularly spelled words. And here's what the research tells us. Consider this: 8 words account for 18% of all the words students typically read and write, 25 words for 33%, 100 words for 50%, and 300 words for 65%. Many schools typically assess students in the primary grades to monitor their progress on learning to read and spell high-frequency words accurately and automatically. And you can see here that teaching and assessing those first 300 high-frequency words has a big payoff. It helps students to read and spell up to 65% of the words that they need. Here's a takeaway, and there's a copy of this on page 27 in your handout. There are many lists of high-frequency words available, but this page organizes the first 200 high-frequency words into some helpful categories for you. The column on the left-hand side of the page lists the high-frequency words that have irregular spelling patterns in their order of frequency. These words are permanently irregular words because they have to be memorized, and they should be taught as what we call spell-out words. And we'll talk about teaching those kinds of words in just a minute. The columns on the right-hand side of the page list the high-frequency words with regular spelling patterns, and they're organized by common vowel spellings. These words should be taught as sound-out words in phonics or spelling lessons, featuring the corresponding pattern. So think for a minute about your current curriculum. We know that high-frequency words make up a large percentage of the words that students use in reading and writing. So it makes sense that learning to read and spell these words should be a high priority. Phonics can be taught systematically and explicitly through either decoding lessons or through spelling instruction. We're going to take a look at an example of a systematic explicit spelling lesson, Then that applies what we know about how the brain works to teach sound out words and spell out words. This slide shows the teacher's lesson guide page. Notice that 2 words from the first 200 high frequency words list appear in this lesson. We've got the sound out word, just, and the spell out word, are. When the lesson begins, the teacher explicitly teaches several consonant blends and reviews the sound out words, reminding students that they have to listen for every sound in the word. Then the teacher continues the teaching phase by guiding students as they work on the corresponding lesson form. Here's what the student sees in this lesson, and you'll find a copy of this form at the top of page 8 in your handout, so you can follow along with me. The teacher dictates a word in this lesson first, and the student circles a letter to represent each sound, 1 word in each row. The student has to listen carefully for each sound and then circle the letter or letters that represent that sound. In this lesson, the student will trace the silent E if it is needed to make the vowel sound long, or cross it out if it's not needed because the vowel is short. Then the student writes the word. Students love this scaffolding for them, where the letters are written and they just have to choose them rather than trying to remember what they look like. Follow along on your copy and let's see how this works. Look at row number 1 and circle the letters you need for the word stop. Then write the word in the space. Go ahead and compare your lesson form to this one. Abby circled S and T in the first section to represent that consonant blend that we hear. She circled the letter O in the middle section to represent the vowel sound, and the letter P in the last section to represent the ending sound. She crossed out the silent E because it's not needed for a short vowel sound, and then she wrote the word stop. This sample lesson follows the research-based practice of having students correct their words immediately after selecting the letters and writing the word. The student puts a colored pencil under each letter to check their work as the teacher spells the word for them. So let's go ahead and check your work. S-T-O-P. Now, find row number 2 and circle the letters you need for the word grade, and then write the word. So see, Abby circled a letter to represent each sound in the word grade. She traced the dotted E because it is needed to make that long A sound, and then she wrote the word. Check your work. G-R-A-D-E. Number 3, flag. Check your word. F-L-A-G. Number 4, smile. Check your word. S-M-I-L-E. As you can see, Abby made an error. So she put a dot under the box and traced the silent E, and then she rewrote smile correctly. Number 5, drum. Check your word. D-R-U-M. She made another error. So she put a dot under the correct letter and rewrote drum correctly. So as a teacher, I would just continue down the page for the rest of the words. Glade, just, desk, must, and mask. When students are learning to spell sound out words, the instruction should help them segment a word into individual sounds and then identify the letter or letters required to make that sound. When they're learning to read sound out words, the instruction should help them recognize the individual letters, associate each letter with its sound, and then blend the sounds to decode the word. Next, we're going to look at a systematic strategy for teaching students how to learn to spell words with irregular spelling patterns, those spell out words. This strategy is based on the brain research we looked at earlier, and it supports word-specific memory. Read the word, spell the word, read the word again. In this lesson, the teacher presents the spell out word using a whiteboard and follows the spell out word routine. using an I do it, we do it, you do it model. And that's an example of systematic, explicit instruction. The teacher would move her finger under the word when reading it, point to each letter when spelling the word, and then move her finger under the word when reading it again. We'll use arrows on this slide. Let's see how it works. Put yourself in the role of a student and respond in this lesson. First, my turn. Just listen. R, A, R, E, R. Now do it with me. Ready? R, A, R, E, R. Now you do it. Ready? R, A, R, E, R. Great job. Next, we're going to look at a strategy that students can use for independently practicing spell out words. At the bottom of this form, you can see that there's more scaffolded support where the student has an opportunity to practice the spell out word independently. The student says the word R, traces or writes each letter as they say the letter names aloud, A, R, E, and then says the word again, R. You can use the I do it, we do it, you do it spell out strategy during reading or spelling lessons with your current curriculum as you're teaching irregular, high frequency words. Using a different strategy to teach spell out and sound out words helps students learn these words better. And you can have students practice independently by saying the word, spelling the word as they write each letter, and then saying the word again. After students practice spelling and writing the words in the lesson, they'll fold the page over and take a test. You can use the same words from the lesson or come up with your own list. Next, they review the spell out words and do some dictation sentences. The examples we just looked at come from the Signs for Sounds Systematic Spelling Program, which is a print-based program with 2 levels. And there are sample lessons on our website that you can download for free. Let's talk about what else the research tells us about phonics and word recognition. Most phonics programs teach students to decode accurately, but learning phonics doesn't guarantee that students are able to decode words automatically. From the research, we know that in order to become fluent readers, students need to learn to decode unknown words accurately and automatically. Students who use all of their mental energy to sound out the words are not able to focus on the meaning of what they're reading. In fact, research findings show that students who have not developed automaticity by the beginning of 2nd grade are at risk for reading failure. Here's an example of a phonics lesson that uses a strategy to build automaticity in decoding words in isolation. This sample exercise is in your handout on page 11, and there are several blank templates for the strategy in the appendix, so you can use it with your current curriculum. Notice that the words going down the columns are organized as word families, or they're grouped together because of a similar pattern to provide support to the student. For example, the words in the first column all begin with the soft C sound. The words in the second column all end with a short vowel followed by NCE, and the words in the third column are all in the ACE word family. Now look at the words going across the rows. Notice that when reading across a row, the student doesn't have the benefit of word families or similar features, so they have to carefully examine each word when moving from column to column across a row, and that's more challenging for them. How does the strategy work? Well, first, the student listens to a very short lesson on an audio CD about the phonics element featured in the exercise. Then they do a 1-minute cold timing to see how many words they can read before practicing. They read quietly aloud down each column and then across each row until the timer sounds. They should underline any words that they can't read quickly and continue. When the timer sounds, they draw a vertical line after the last word they read. So in this example, let's say the student read down every column and then read across the first 3 rows. They got to the word face when the timer sounded, and they underlined 4 mistakes. To count the number of words they read, use the numbers on the left-hand side and across the top of the words and keep counting. They got to the word face, reading across the rows. So we'll start from the number to the left, which is 40, and count over to the word face, which would make the total number of words read 43. Then we subtract the number of words underlined from the number of words read to calculate the cold score, which is 39 words correct per minute. So they record their cold score on a graph in blue so they can monitor their progress at the end of the lesson. Next, the student reads down each column of words along with a recording of a proficient reader on a CD in order to learn those words. And that's teacher modeling. This involves more than just listening to the recording. The student has to be actively involved 100% of the time. They're looking at the words and reading along quietly, aloud with the narrator. The student does several timed readings until they reach the goal of reading down all the columns and across all the rows in 1 minute. That's repeated practice. And they record their score each time. When they can read all the words down and across in 1 minute, which would be 60 words in this lesson, the teacher times them and records the hot score. So we can see here that the student made no errors on the last timing and read exactly 60 words correct in 1 minute. So they record their hot score in red above the cold score, and that allows them to visually see the progress they've made. You can use this strategy with your current curriculum, and we'll take a look at those templates at the end of the section. Now, let's talk about another big milestone in phonics and word recognition. By the middle grades, students need to know how to decode multisyllabic words because most of the words they encounter in print are words of 7 or more letters and 2 or more syllables. Here's what the standards tell us about decoding multisyllabic words. Students have to use their combined skills to read unfamiliar multisyllabic words in context and out of context. Here's what the research tells us. Students can be taught to chunk multisyllabic words into spelling units that can be decoded. And we know that once students can accurately decode single-syllable words and pronounce all of the typical vowel combinations, there are 2 additional skills they need to successfully decode multisyllabic words. They need to be able to pronounce prefixes and suffixes in isolation and decode open and closed syllables. Let's talk about what the research says about affixes. First of all, we know that 80% of all words have at least one prefix or suffix. So if the students know their prefixes and suffixes, they can quickly recognize them as chunks within those multisyllabic words. There are a limited number of affixes and they occur frequently. So that's really worth your time to teach those to your students. Here's a table that lists the most common prefixes and suffixes with an example word for each one. And you'll find this takeaway on page 28 in your handout. Here's another example lesson. This one builds automaticity with multisyllabic words. The exercise begins with the lesson on an audio CD that presents 5 specific suffixes. The student reads along with the audio to learn how to pronounce the suffixes in isolation. I'm just going to play the beginning of that audio for you.
Look at the suffixes at the top of this page. A suffix is a letter or group of letters added to the end of a root or root word. Listen to the suffixes as you read them with me. Ready? Ism, as in externalism. Us, as in generous. Ity, as in extremity. Ent, as in indifferent. Ant, as in repentant. Look at the suffixes in the 2 rows of flashcards. Read across the rows with me. Ready? ant.
So then the audio continues and reads through those 2 rows of suffixes with the student, and the student practices along with the audio. So next they would do a cold timing, try to read all the words down each column and across each row independently to see how many they could read in 1 minute. And then they read along with the audio to hear how the words are correctly pronounced. And I'll play a bit of that for you as well.
Look at the words in the table. Each word ends with a suffix. Now read the words down each column with me. First, read the word as it is divided. Then read it the way we really say it. Ready? Externalism, externalism. Defeatism, defeatism. Immoralism, immoralism. Perfectionism, perfectionism.
So in the full lesson, the audio would continue through all the columns of the words. And think about how these words are pronounced in the lesson. Each syllable is pronounced phonetically, and then the whole word is pronounced the way we really say it. So a student can take the step of moving from that phonetic pronunciation, perplexity, to the way we really say it, perplexity, if they can recognize and know that word, if they've practiced it enough. So think about this. A student who develops the foundational skills quickly, who has had more exposure to vocabulary, background knowledge, and the language of books, will have an advantage here. They'll be able to self-correct more multisyllabic words when they're attempting to decode them, because they're words that student has heard before. And when they can get close to the correct pronunciation, they'll recognize the word. So in this lesson, the student would complete the same steps we saw in the last example. Underlining the mistakes, drawing a line after the last word they read, and then recording all of those things. So there's also a takeaway template for this type of lesson at the end of your handout. The ability to pronounce open and closed syllables in isolation is the other key skill for decoding multisyllabic words. We know that open and closed syllables make up almost 75% of syllables in English words. So students who can automatically read open and closed syllables accurately are able to read multisyllabic words. Look at the sample words at the bottom of this slide. They contain open and closed syllables. Students are taught that a vowel at the end of a syllable says its long sound, like low and K in the word relocation, and he in the word adhesive. They're also taught that a vowel not at the end of a syllable says its short sound, like pan in expansionism. If a student has learned to read prefixes and suffixes by sight, like re and shun in the word relocation, and if they can accurately and quickly pronounce those open or closed syllables in isolation, then they'll be able to decode these words. Here's another example lesson from the same program. First, it teaches open syllables in isolation, and you see those up at the top of the chart at the top of the page. And those open and closed syllables are found in the columns and rows below. Here's another example of a story exercise. This gives students the chance to read words they've practiced in isolation in connected text, and that helps build their comprehension. Next, let's take a look at some takeaways you can use with your current curriculum. Here's a template for single syllable words. Here's a graph that you can use for your students to graph their cold and hot timings when they're practicing reading words. And here's a template for words with prefixes, suffixes, or open and closed syllables. And all of these can be found at the end of your handout. The examples we just looked at come from the print-based Word Warm-Ups program. There's also a web-based version of the program with 3 levels, and you can sign up for a free 60-day trial on our website. We're going to move on to fluency next. Reading fluently is reading like you speak. Fluent readers read accurately, at an appropriate rate, and with expression. Non-fluent readers struggle in at least one of these areas. Why is fluency so important? Well, let's think about these two readers we have, one who is proficient and one who is at risk. In a 10-minute reading period, a very proficient reader who reads 200 words per minute silently could read 2,000 words. In that same 10-minute period, an at-risk student who reads 50 words per minute would only read about 500 words. So that's equal reading time, but definitely not an equal number of words read. And consider how that disparity plays out over the course of a year. The at-risk reader reads a lot less text. They're exposed to far less new vocabulary. They struggle to decode, and they can't give as much of their focus to comprehension. And that could lead to the downward spiral of reading failure that we talked about earlier. Here's what we know about fluency. The standards tell us that young students in kindergarten must read emergent reader texts with purpose and understanding, and older students need to read with sufficient accuracy and fluency to support their comprehension. We know from over 30 years of research that fluency is one of the critical foundational skills of reading, because reading fluency development is highly correlated to comprehension. And that's the goal of reading, that students understand what they're reading. And we know that students become more fluent by reading more. So what's the solution? Do we just schedule a block of time every day for our students to read independently? Well, in my classroom, those struggling readers did not use their time well. They would get a book that looked like everybody else's, they would turn through the pages, but they weren't really reading. Research analyzed by the National Reading Panel suggests that just encouraging at-risk students to read independently is not the most effective way to improve reading achievement. So how do we explicitly teach students to read fluently? Well, the National Reading Panel also found research data supporting several effective strategies. The first one, teacher modeling, consists of a proficient reader modeling correct pronunciation, rate, and expression while reading with a less able reader. Paired or partner reading, choral reading, those are all examples of teacher modeling. Or a student could read along with a recording. The National Reading Panel also found that repeated reading is the most powerful strategy for improving reading fluency. This is where a student reads a short story or passage many times until they're able to read it fluently. Research also shows that students are motivated and their performance increases when they can see feedback on their own progress through progress monitoring, like the graphs we looked at earlier. Next, we're going to take a look at a sample lesson for beginning readers that demonstrates research-based fluency instruction. As we look at what students are required to do in this lesson, notice the research-based strategies that we include. This lesson is from the GATE program, and that's a grade level 1.8. It begins with phonemic awareness instruction. Students are listening for the featured sound, which is the TH sound, and they give a thumbs up if they hear the sound in the words the teacher pronounces. Then the teacher pronounces several words sound by sound, and students blend those sounds to pronounce the word. The lesson transitions from phoneme awareness to phonics as students connect the sounds to the corresponding letters. To prepare to read fluently, students first learn to read words in isolation that will appear in the story. Look at the words in red font here and think about how they're different. Right, they're high frequency words. This lesson applies the brain research we talked about earlier to teach sound out words and spell out words differently. The words in the black box are sound out words. Students are going to be guided to sound out the words in the black box. The words in the red box are spell out words. Students will learn these words using the read the word, spell the word, read the word again routine for learning the spell out words by memory. Next, students are guided through several steps to develop their fluency as they read the story. First, we emphasize comprehension. We have students write a prediction about the story. This pre-reading activity prepares the students to read the story, and it reminds them that they're reading for information. There's a purpose behind this. The teacher and the students decide on a prediction using the picture, title, and key words of the story to help them. Then they write it together, and you can see the teacher modeling that writing on her board there. Next, students do a cold reading of the story while the teacher times them. They underline the words they don't know while they're reading. This cold reading sets a baseline for measuring improvement. Each student reads individually as the teacher times the group. And then students record and graph their individual cold timing scores in blue on their fluency graphs. With a visual representation of their timing scores for each story, students are able to monitor their progress. Students continue working on fluency as they read the story aloud along with the teacher. This teacher modeling step supports students so they learn new words, they confirm the pronunciation of difficult words, and they master sight words. Reading along with the teacher also models appropriate phrasing and expression for the students. So the teacher and students will read the story together aloud using the chart in the teacher's guide. The teacher reads slowly enough that the students can actually read along. They pause to decode words with those featured sounds. They read the story together several times until students have learned the words. Next, students do repeated readings for 1 minute to improve their fluency and master the story. The teacher times the small group of students several times and listens to one student read during each timing, while the others read quietly aloud independently. She'll continue timing the students in this way, each time listening to a different student, until she's listened to and recorded the score of each student. And while she's doing that, everybody else is practicing on their own. Students are going to practice independently until they can reach their words correct per minute goal. And then they mark their graphs in red to record their final timing scores. And this gives them the opportunity to monitor their progress. And they take a lot of pride in looking at that progress. Finally, the students answer several questions about the story, and they write a sentence telling what the story is about. This activity assesses student comprehension by encouraging the students to remember what they've read and reminding them that they're reading for meaning. It also continues to support phonics development by giving students an opportunity to write words with the featured phonics patterns. Students are going to work to build automaticity by reading lists of sound out words and spell out words. The teacher introduces the sound out words to the students by blending them slowly while reading down each column and then across the rows in the word list. For the spell out words, she's going to introduce them using that read the word, spell the word, read the word again strategy. In this beginning reading example, students practice reading the word list as a group with the teacher. Then she listens to and times each student as they read the words down and then across independently, and they continue to practice until they can complete the list in 1 minute. Think about how your current program develops fluency. The research identifies several effective strategies: teacher modeling, repeated reading, and progress monitoring. If your program doesn't use those strategies, think about how you could add one or more of them to what you're doing in your classroom, and that will help your students make more progress. The examples we just looked at come from Read Naturally's GATE program. This is a phonics and fluency program for beginning readers. And the fluency strategy we looked at is available in several formats, including Read Naturally Encore and 1 Minute Reader. And of course, in our web-based programs. So today and last time, we've talked about standards and research behind the foundational reading skills, as well as some effective strategies to help you teach those skills. Each foundational skill is a building block, and knowing some of the research that tells us what's important and how to teach those critical skills most effectively adds to your tools and knowledge as you plan your instruction to meet standards. So I hope you keep these research-based practices in mind and try some of the strategies and takeaways we've talked about today so you get better results with your current curriculum. We also invite you to check out the Read Naturally website for specific information about each of our intervention programs that are based on this research. If you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat. I see there are a few there. You can also reach out to me directly, or you can reach out to our customer service department at that info email address. And I also encourage you to check out our website. There's a lot of good information there. And of course, you can sign up for our free 60-day trial. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Just a reminder that we will be sending out follow-up emails with links to the webinar recording in about 24 hours. Feel free to share the recording with your colleagues. Please respond to the survey questions that will appear on your screen after the webinar so we can continue to improve the educational experience for all of you and our future webinars. Thank you.